People. We're one of the organisers of this in the DPO Forum, it's Disabled People's Organisations Forum. And on the chairs table, we've got Bethany, Dennis and Maureen, and representing Inclusion London and Disability Rights UK. Just some quick housekeeping. If there is a fire alarm, the staff will come and evacuate us. There is no drill plan, so if it does happen, it's a real thing, but the staff will handle it. So, if we are now live, I just want to say that this is the People's History Museum, great friends of ours, and today this is the first National Disability Hustings organised and held by disabled people's organisations. That's organisations either completely or majority run by disabled people. And our panel today is 100% disabled people. So we have made history today. Hooray for us. Thank you. And I will quickly introduce the candidates. So we have, starting on the right, there's Baroness Sal Brinton for the Liberal Democrat Party, Charles Fifield, Conservative Disability Group, Vicky Foxcroft, Shadow Labour Minister for Disabled People, and Mags Lewis, Green Party Disability Spokesperson. So there are 16 million disabled people in the UK. We're a diverse group with different needs. Many of us experience multiple intersecting layers of oppression. Overall, we remain one of the most marginalised and excluded groups in society. We're one of the most hardest hit by austerity, the hardest hit by the COVID pandemic and the cost of living pandemic crisis. We are more likely to be poor, earn less, have lower qualifications. Public transport, technology, housing, street space, cultural and sports venues and activities remain inaccessible for many of us. Whoever forms the next government has the power to change this. So this is why we are keen to hear from the Conservative, Green, Labour and Liberal Democrats today. So, and just to reiterate, the back table over there is the privacy table if you don't want to be on camera. And you can see BSL here, and we've got captions up there. So without really any further ado, I want to take us into so we've compiled from a lot of questions that have been sent to us 8 key questions that the candidates have had in advance to answer. So we'll go through those, and then we'll throw out to the audience. There's going to be a timer, so the candidates each get 2 minutes, and then a bell rings. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah? Okay. And we'll get straight into the questions. So I think the first person to ask a question is Bethany.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here today. So I'm going to ask from this side to that side. As Rick has said, you each have 2 minutes each. There will be a bell to remind you. So question 1 is from the DPO Forum as a whole. And it is 15 years ago, the UK ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People. Since then, as you'll know, the UN Disability Committee have found the UK to be guilty of grave and systemic violations of disabled people's rights. What will your party do to ensure disabled people can enjoy all the rights guaranteed under the UNCRDP?
And thank you very much for that question. I'm proud that the last Labour government ratified the UNCRPD, but the truth is the last 14 years disabled people have been hurting. Things have gone backwards, not forwards. UN committee members said disabled people are demonised and devalued. And this was following on from the 2016 report that said there were grave and systemic failures of disabled people. So Labour is committed to the social model of disability, and we will work with disabled people to create policies that break down barriers to equality and ensure that disabled people are represented right across government. And I've been doing this as Shadow Minister for Disabled People. I've held roadshows, I've met with disabled people, organisations and others, and I would continue to do this in government. The Tories have had 5 ministers for disabled people in the time that I have been appointed. We've seen it downgraded and then re-upgraded. Now, Labour are committed to ensuring that the principles of the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People are reflected and implemented right across governments.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Mags, and I'm from the Green Party. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Can you hear me? Great. So, the UN Convention sets out our rights to participate fully, but I think we all know that in reality that's not the case. It's a fiction, and violations are commonplace. My party has a range of practical policies and changes to end this hostile environment, which has got so much worse over the last 14 years. And I'm actually have to say that I think I'm under a Labour council in Leicester, and there's things that could be so much improved there too. So there needs to be systemic change. So what would the Green Party do? The first thing we do is we would restore the value of benefits for disabled people with an immediate uplift of 5%. We'd end the targeting of carers and disabled when it comes to demonising them about what they're entitled to, and making out there's some kind of benefit cheats. You know, all of this rhetoric has to change. We'd also look at reinstating the Access to Elected Office Fund. Now, this fund was, it was key to getting more disabled people into Parliament, yet the last government ended it, and they put the responsibility back onto parties, which for small parties like the Green Party puts that as a huge disadvantage, and also doesn't value disabled people and the role we can give, and makes us feel like a burden. So we'd want to look at reintroducing that. I think the biggest thing that I would want to see too is for Parliament to do as they say. And so one thing that would really help me as a disabled person is job shares.
Thank you.
With job shares, I would want to see MPs with job shares. I'd want to see remote working and flexible ways of working, so that instead of having that macho culture in Parliament, we actually have disabled voices. Thank you.
Right, hello, I'm Charles Fifield. I'm the Conservative person on the panel, and I spent 12 years being a borough councillor in West Cheshire. In relation to question one, the original report that came out in 2016, the government did strongly disagree with it, saying it's too narrow in scope. However, as they've gone through it, and the recent update that was, I think, about 2 or 3 months ago, there were 3 things that were particularly highlighted, I think, by the UN report. And that's it's saying guaranteeing the right of persons with disability, and the 3 particular bits were to live independently and be included in the community, to work and employment, and an adequate standard of living and social protection. Now, the government has recently come up with a disability action plan, which has got 32 actions across a dozen different areas as to go and approach these sort of things. There's no simple solution, I think, to the varying difficulties that we all face as disabled people. And one thing that I learned from my time as a councillor was I helped set up something called the Disability Access Forum at our council, because I wanted to help other disabled people in predominantly it was the built environment. I'm a chartered surveyor by profession, and one of the things that I noticed was that some buildings were being designed in accordance with the Equalities Act, and prior to that the Disability Discrimination Act, which improved the design, but it didn't always work well for all disabled people. And I think that there is a slight concern for me in politics, regardless of what rosette that you wear, is that somehow there is a simple fits-all solution for all disabled people. We have different disabilities and we adapt to things in different ways, and I think we need to have that sort of approach. And I do think the Disability Access Plan is a very good start in relation to it, and whilst I hope that the next government will be blue in colour, looking at the opinion polls, that may well not be the case. And I do hope that whoever is in government will not simply get rid of that and actually look at taking it forward, potentially fine-tuning it, because I think there's a really good lot of good ideas within it.
Thank you. Can I just quickly follow up on that very briefly? I'd be really interested to know your thoughts as well on, obviously, you mentioned the Disability Action Plan, and just very specifically in the context of the question on the UNCRDP, we know that, of course, the most recent report that showed the no progress on tackling grave and systemic violations included that context of the Disability Action Plan being released. So just be really interested in kind of some more clarification on that scope that you were talking to and how you think that the action plan really meets those violations that we were talking about. Thank you.
Well, I think you could probably have a discussion event on just the disability access plan. Is that there are, I think, 32 actions within there. I could read through it and point out which ones point to which area, but I do think that they will benefit. That they are some good ideas, but they could probably do with fine tuning and a bit more detail in relation to it.
Thank you very much. I'm Sal Brinton, and my party has had support for delivering the UNCRPD since 2010 because we supported Labour's introduction of it. And I was just checking our disability statements in previous manifestos, and it's good to see it's there. And we want to do so because we absolutely believe that we need to follow it. We in Parliament, those of us, regardless of which party you're with, see the effect on disabled people's lives of the failures, and actually the report exposed that from the UN for the second time. Myself and my colleague Celia Thomas in the Lords particularly fight for this, but it's actually cross-party in the Lords. That's the way we operate. We also have really strongly resisted the Conservative attempts to dilute and to leave the EHRC, because we believe that actually we need international law to fight for our rights as well. And we really regret over the last 6 or 7 years the dilution of the powers of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and what, particularly in relation to disabled people, it's not been good at all. I just wanted to add, given that there's been discussion about remote working and job shares, and thanks, Mags, for raising it. One of the problems that we have in Parliament is that it does not have to follow the Equality Act for disability because it is a palace, which means our parliamentarians, regardless of which house they work in, know that they and their colleagues don't have to do anything, and they don't. Staff are brilliant. And the civil servants inside Parliament are brilliant, but it is absolutely shameful. And I think Parliament should take it upon itself to follow the Equality Act generally, but specifically for disabled people too.
Okay, thank you. Now, just before I go on to question 2, I did forget to mention this wonderful thing, that our interpreters today are deaf interpreters, provided helpfully by the British Deaf Association. So these are deaf people interpreting for us. So this is a 100% disabled event, 100% disabled panel, 100% disabled interpreters. Yes! Okay, question 2. I'm going to do this one. A question from GMCDP. One of the rights guaranteed by the UN CRPD is the right to an adequate standard of living. A third of disabled people live in poverty, and 7 in 10 food bank users are disabled people. Many of us struggle to get benefits because of flawed assessments. The rates are too low and do not cover the extra costs. We are threatened with sanctions and are pushed into unsuitable jobs, and some people lost their lives because of DWP failures. What will your party do to ensure all disabled people can enjoy their rights to an adequate standard of living? And I think if we start with Mags.
Hi, thank you. So the Green Party have had a long history of championing inclusion. And so we'd want to look at several things to help disabled people and all people, really. First off, we would oppose plans to replace PIP in any way with vouchers. And in the longer term, we'd want to look at really reforming these intrusive eligibility tests. And we also oppose the involvement of the private sector in these areas because we don't think that's enhanced things. We'd want to simplify the benefits, as I say. And we'd want to stop this the demonisation of the carers, for example, who, someone might receive 52 pence extra a year, and yet they're being sanctioned for thousands of pounds. This kind of gross injustice has to stop. So we want to look at that. We want to end this culture of fear. I've already mentioned that we want to do an immediate uplift of 5% on benefits. And overall, we want to be looking at free personal care as well. So along with the Scottish model, because we think that's going to really help disabled people in a number of ways. So there's a lot of different ways that we're trying to just really push and centre disabled people.
Thank you. On to Charles.
Thank you. I just one of the points that was just mentioned. I agree with you in relation to the issue of carers allowance, that it's a cliff edge, and it just isn't very sensible. I had the opportunity to raise the issue with the Chancellor of the Exchequer last month, and I particularly pointed this out, that whilst an increase in £1,500 or what it is in relation to the caring allowance over recent years is good, the cliff edge situation, I just think it doesn't need to happen, that it's having a negative effect on people, and that's something that needs to be improved on. In relation to the issue of food banks, I do think that there does need to be looked at in relation to the statistics of the figures of there and where they're coming from. One of the last things I did as a councillor last year before I stepped down is I spent a morning in a food bank with one of the people who organises it, to look through the statistics to see what we could do to help people, because I'm a great believer, if you want to solve a problem, you've got to be able to understand it. And the statistics that came out of that were quite interesting in relation to the amount of people going, and in terms of the frequency of it, and that they were saying that effectively 20% of the people who were coming were receiving 50% of the food parcels, and it's how do you go and identify and help those people. So I think that's kind of the way I would try and approach these things. And one of the things there which I do think needs to be dealt with and improved is the issue of in relation to universal credit and the delays that are there when changes in universal credit takes place. That should be able to be shortened. That should be able to be done, and I think it would remove a lot of the pressure that's within the system. And I think those are the sort of things that we need to be able to look at, as well as helping people back into employment.
And Sal now.
Thank you. This is going to sound like a shopping list, but in 2 minutes, there's a lot to say. We're very clear as a party that there needs to be major changes to a whole load of issues relating to benefits and to rights to improve the life of disabled people. First of all, we would scrap the bedroom tax. We would replace sanctions with incentives. And that is a shorthand for changing the entire culture of way DWP and assessors operate, because the way they operate is an absolute disgrace. We would introduce a national food strategy, because since Brexit, food prices, particularly vegetables, fresh meat and fresh fish, have become extortionately expensive. And the cost of that has been to our agricultural sector. That's an entirely different debate. But the one thing that communities living in poverty need above all is access to good food. And we would also support that through school dinners as well. We would remove the two-child benefit cap. And as I said, we would improve PIP assessment. And the one thing we would not do is what the Conservative government said they would do if they got back into power, which is to make PIP the same as all the other benefits and based on income, as opposed to actually being something that we need to be able to get around and do our lives properly. Finally, I just want to mention on transport, a lot of our rights are completely and utterly useless if we as disabled people can't get to work, can't get to social things. And I was on the House of Lords Select Committee on the Equality Act and Disability in 2016, which lists, I mean, it's 230 pages long. The government has only actually done anything about 3 or 4 of those items. Until we get transport and access to everything in public life, we will be failing disabled people.
Thank you, Sal. And finally with Vicky, can I just ask everyone to be closer on the mic and to project more? People at the back just need a bit more volume. Thanks.
Okay, people have been struggling for the last 14 years with the cost of living crisis. And we all know the extra costs for having a disability estimated to be £975 per month. But the government have done nothing to address this. The benefits bill has gone up, yet individual benefits have gone down. The assessment process doesn't work for everyone, and it's often cruel and humiliating. So we will reform the assessment process. We will focus on what people can do, not what they can't do. We will ensure that the system gets the decisions right the first time, rather than having to go through mandatory reconsiderations, tribunals, appeals, and so forth. We will ensure that it treats disabled people with dignity and respect. And we will support disabled people to live independently with control over their lives, ensuring that people get the treatment and care they need, stopping problems from escalating. And we will protect the poorest and those in greatest need. And we will enable as many as possible who are able to be able to work and fully participate in society. And we will do this by a new combined national jobs and careers service. We will make reasonable adjustments easier and timely. We will make sure that people can access to work and get in principle decisions quickly, so when they get a job, they can take the job. And we will support people to be able to try work without fear of losing their benefits and having to go through the assessment process. As well as this, we will ensure disability pay gap reporting and mandatory disability employment reporting.
Thanks very much for that. Question 3 is from Disability Rights UK. Social care is in crisis. There are huge waiting lists, increased bureaucracy, difficulties with employing staff. Many working age people have to give up almost half of their benefits income to pay for care and are in debt. What will your party do to address those problems? If you could say which party each time you speak, that would really help those of us with ADHD. And can we start with Charles, please? Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Charles, I'm the Conservative candidate. Social care is important, causes great concern, especially to those with serious disabilities. We've invested £8.6 billion over the last 2 years. I did mention in the last one that I've also spoken with the Chancellor of the Exchequer about this issue over the cliff edge on carers allowance, which I think does need to be solved. There's a commitment within the manifesto that we'll attract and retain a high quality care workforce. It says make reforms to our market for older people's housing and support unpaid carers, and that we will implement our planned reforms to cap social care costs from October 2025. I do think that there are bits that we can learn. I mentioned beforehand in terms of improving the housing stock, and it's the just gone at the moment, but the disabled facilities grant in terms of improving and adapting houses, I think can help. But I think we also need to, when we look at social care, is to consider the rights of the individual, and that certainly in relation to, I think, seriously disabled people where you might need intimate social care, that I think it's important in terms of the dignity of disabled people, that disabled people are allowed and they should be able to insist on intimate social care being from somebody of the same biological sex as themselves. And I think that that is an important thing in terms of dignity, if they so wish.
Thank you very much, Sal Brinton, Liberal Democrats. So this time 10 years ago, we, along with Labour and the Conservatives, all agreed that we would accept the Dill-Knot review that was going to radically transform social care. Come the 2015 election, the Tories walked away from it, which is why this problem has not yet been resolved. We're still very clear as a party. We would create a national care agency. We will have an individual living task force, a living task force. We insist that there should be free personal care for disabled people and for elderly people. It is outrageous that people can stand over a patient's body and argue about whether their incontinence is caused by a spinal fracture or because they're old. It is a disgrace. I have seen that happen to a relative of mine, and as a result, the NHS refused to pay for any of her personal care. That should not happen anymore. We would increase a carer's allowance. We would have a guarantee and regular breaks for family carers and a carer's leave framework. This isn't just our current leader's passion. This has been in our manifesto now for 12 years. We would also create a pupil premium for child carers to ensure they get the extra support that they need in schools. We also would make caring a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, because the impact of looking after your loved one in an unpaid role actually is an enormous burden, and we all need help when facing that. But above all, what we have to do is to ensure that the next government makes all the parties come together to deliver this, and quickly. No more new commissions. We know what needs to be done.
Vicky Foxcroft, the Labour Party. Despite the rhetoric, this has never been a priority for the government. We need a long-term plan. We will have the principle of home first, ensuring early help and utilising technology. We will transform social care so that those in need never go without. We will have national standards enforced by a strengthened regulator, ending the postcode lottery for care. We will deliver a long-term plan for social care that will lead to a national care service. And there will be no new contracts for care providers who don't meet those high standards. We will have a fair pay agreement in adult social care to negotiate fair pay, terms and conditions, and training. And on top of this, we will have 40,000 extra appointments a week, 8,500 extra mental health staff to cut waiting lists. And our reforms will provide high quality social care shaped by the involvement of care users, which is so important to us, families, and consistent with the principles of independent living. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Mags Lewis from the Green Party. I think it's about flipping things around and understanding that the disabled people have so much to offer. And at the moment, we're unable to offer as much as we can because we're being held back. We're not being allowed to flourish. So I think it's about what we can do about that. So for one thing, as I say, the Green Party will be looking at free personal care like in Scotland. I think it's really important that we have a proper career structure for carers and for staff, so we have retention, we have some really good feelings of value for people so that they know that they are cherished. We'd also want to look at ensuring that disabled workers have the job support they need, and things are a lot more flexible. For example, I know that when I was applying for access to work, I almost didn't get it because the system was so complicated. And it's this kind of needless bureaucracy that needs to be really, really taken by the horns and dealt with. So those are some of the practical things, but I think it's about the tone and the priority and actually understanding that words can be cheap. And so what we all need to see is action.
Thank you. So our next question is on deinstitutionalization. This question is from Free Our People campaign, and there are also representatives here today from My Life, My Choice. Many disabled people are still forced to live in institutions. The number of special schools is growing. Some local authorities are considering forcing us into care homes if it is cheaper to support us there. People are detained under the Mental Health Act and medicated against their will in hospitals. 2,000 people with a learning disability or autism are in long-stay hospitals, deprived of liberty, often over-medicated and abused. What will you and your party do to change this? We'll start with Sal and then go in order from there. Thank you.
Sal, Liberal Democrat. We would do everything. My colleague Liz Barker, who was our front bencher on health and mental health a decade ago, was arguing then that we needed to revisit the Mental Health Act and make sure that this appalling deprivation of liberty stopped. When we were in coalition, we insisted on getting parity of esteem and a target for parity of funding for mental health. Because frankly, institutionalization is a cheap way for a health service to deal with it. Unfortunately, we're still nowhere near any financial parity whatsoever. In fact, it's got much, much worse. But the real shame is that we came this close to having a new mental health bill. It had almost finished its run in the Commons. The House of Lords had had a select committee on it. Cross-party, I think it was agreed. I'm looking at Vicky because she was probably much more involved than I will know. And unfortunately, the government delayed it, and because it didn't start in the Lords, it was lost. There are very strict rules about which bills you can save. So I am going to ask Vicky if her government will bring it back and make it go through quickly, because we have the perfect attitude. There are no parliamentarians against these changes cross-party. Let's make it happen.
Vicky Foxcroft, the Labour Party. Mental health has not received the priority it needs. It needs to be reformed to give it the same parity as physical health. Now, we'll all remember during the COVID crisis when DNRs were placed on people's medical records, do not resuscitate notices. This was wrong, and it caused fear among many disabled people, and this must never, ever happen again. Mental health legislation is woefully out of date. Treatment of people with a learning disability or autism is a disgrace. So we need to modernise legislation, giving patients greater choice, autonomy, enhancing their rights, support, and ensure everyone is treated with dignity and respect. So that does mean looking for that legislation in the future. But on top of this, we will also recruit 8,500 mental health workers, and we will ensure that access to specialist mental health workers is available in every school, because we know far too many of our young people are struggling at the moment with all of the experiences that they've had to deal with in their life.
Mags Lewis from the Green Party. Well, I mean, I'm quite heartened to some of the things I'm hearing up on the stage today about some, I think we're all saying we do need to see change. And there are some gross injustices with how things are running at the moment. I've already mentioned free personal care and how that would help. But I think we do need to look at legislation. I'm aware that more and more councils, for example, are going bankrupt. And so key words like at the moment they don't have to provide, for example, transport for children with special educational needs or disability from the age of 16 to 18, because it said they should provide it. It doesn't say must. So these kind of key words, it's absolutely crucial that this is a priority. And that would be something I would want Green MPs to be working on, to get these wordings changed so that we are protected, because we cannot rely on these little miswords for councils or nationally for people to do the right thing. So I think we need to see some very quick changes, and also understanding where we are with the councils and the fact that they're so incredibly underfunded. Look at how we can focus on disabled people and bring them more to the table and have their voices heard.
Charles Fifield from the Conservative Party, and I mean, I haven't got too much to add to what's already been said, it does sound like that the legislation that was unfortunately left in limbo may well provide a good way forward for the next Parliament to be able to go and look at that. I do think there is a growing issue here in relation to mental health, and it seems to be a cause and effect, or certainly there's been a huge increase since the pandemic and lockdown. And I think we've got a further question about SEND education later on, so we'll probably talk about it there. So I do think it's something that does need quite a lot of thought in relation to it. But I think this legislation, if it's in limbo, would be a good idea to carry forward, whoever the next government may be.
Thank you. And just a very quick yes or no from each of you. Does your party commit to end the detention on disability grounds?
Yes.
Sorry, what was the question?
Do you commit to end detention on disability grounds?
Yes.
It depends what you mean by that. I don't know enough about the subject to give a yes or no.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we would.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, fifth question. Question from Inclusion London. 1 in 5 disabled people who live in social housing, and 1 in 3 private renters live in unsuitable, inaccessible accommodation. A wheelchair user could wait for 47 years to get an accessible place. People wait for years to get help with adaptations to their home. What will your party do to increase the number of accessible social rent homes and make it easier for people to adapt their homes? And we'll start with Vicky.
Thanks for the question. And this is really important. You know, we all know that we've got a housing crisis at the moment, but it's absolutely amplified for disabled people. So some of the things that we will be doing is we will have the biggest increase in social and affordable house building in a generation. We'll be investing 6.6 billion over the next Parliament, and we'll be upgrading 5 million homes, which will be cutting bills. And we all know that disabled people's bills are quite often, certainly in terms of energy costs and so forth, much, much higher. So cutting those is really important. We will also abolish Section 21, no-fault evictions. And we will improve building safety through regulation to ensure we never see a repeat of the Grenfell tragedy, where 72 people sadly died, of which 41% were disabled people. And we will respond to the inquiry's findings, ensuring that we have swift resolution. And we need to ensure that new development is exemplary, and exemplary must be the norm and not the exception. And we will do this working with disability groups to ensure new homes are truly accessible.
Thank you. So it's Mags Lewis from the Green Party. One of the things that we've put in our manifesto is to build 150,000 social houses per year, because there is such a need for them. We'd want that to be under inclusive universal design principles, but we don't have an actual specific target for fully accessible homes, and I think that's probably something we do need. So that's certainly something I'll be taking back. I just think that it kind of falls into two areas, because you've got the national picture, but you've also got the local picture. So nationally, we have been let down by the Conservatives, and the fact we've got this, you know, people can only dream of owning their own house, and that means that disabled people are even worse off. So we'd want to be looking at legislation, we'd want to be looking at pushing and enabling people to build their houses and retrofitting houses to make them warm, as everyone needs. But locally, I know for myself, in Leicester, we have, for example, 150 social houses owned by the council that have just been mothballed for 3 or 4 years and they've done nothing. So there needs to be a lot of local focus as well to make sure that people take the action they need, because there is no need for that. They could be used by disabled people and key workers, and yet they're just empty.
Thank you. Yes, Charles and the Conservatives. So I'm a chartered surveyor. The simple answer is we need to build more houses in this country. The current government has made progress in relation to it, but the difficulty of decades of underbuilding and the increasing population has created huge pressure on the housing system. Social rented housing has its part to play, but you have an issue there in terms of what is housing need. And unless I think the needs of the disabled are pushed further up the housing needs, you're always going to go and have the situation where people who are considered to be of greater need of housing are going to push in front and get places. And you get scenarios where, for example, with bungalows or other houses which are naturally more suitable for a wider range of disabled people, are not always being exclusively kept for disabled people. Now, there is a way around that, and I spent a year recently working part-time for something called the Arms House Association. Now, that's a charitable form of housing. Because they're a charity, then they have to comply with their charitable aims. And one of those, for example, can be helping disabled people if that charity is there. And that means that those houses are guaranteed for disabled people. So I don't think that there is one single solution to solving this. The best thing we can do is build more houses, if we can make them more adaptable from when we start. But there is a cost to it. There is a cost to everything. And I think one thing we have to remember is that as politicians, we have to be brave about this, because it's too easy, and the Green Party does this a lot, in relation to jumping on the bandwagon and opposing any new housing development if it suits their book in relation to electoral gain. So we need to think about that.
Sal Brinton, Lib Dems. Actually, I think there is one solution, and it's a solution we've all been waiting for well over a decade, and that is the new building regulations that were promised in 2015. I'm a bit of a nerd about this. This is one of the areas I have had debates on in the House of Lords. I'll come back to the detail as much as I can in 2 minutes in a second. But the party's commitment in its manifesto is that we would build 380,000 new houses a year, of which 150,000 would be social housing. We want to increase capital spending by 20 billion overall, and that would more than cover a lot of these houses that we would need to spend a little more on to make sure that they are accessible long term. We would ensure that there's capital funding for adaptations. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace. I was told when I first went into a wheelchair that because I could walk with a stick from my sitting room to my kitchen, I was not entitled to an electric wheelchair. The moment I said it in Parliament, they rang up and said, "Oh, we didn't mean you. We didn't mean you." Appalling. And finally, on building safety, we must also have ground floor accommodation available in flats. It's really, really important. I have debated every single fire bill and building safety bill since Grenfell. We are still waiting for the last government to agree PEEPs in high-rise buildings. That is a disgrace. And in 30 seconds, we need every new house that is built to meet M42, which only costs £3,000 extra a house, and we need a percentage of M43 homes for wheelchair users, which only cost 22,000 extra to build. In capital terms, that is peanuts. Let's make it happen.
Thank you. A very, very quick yes/no follow-up. Will you raise the mandatory standard for new build homes? Each candidate.
Yes.
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 I need to see what the standards are, but I'm generally in favour of doing that.
Okay. Thank you.
I think M42 is what was being referenced. Okay, so the next question from me, I'm Dennis Queen from Greater Manchester Coalition of Disabled People. This question is from the Alliance for Inclusive Education. This year marks 10 years since the introduction of the Children and Families Act 2014, which included a presumption to mainstream education for disabled children and young people. If you were elected, what specific measures would you implement to address the failings within the system and improve accountability and compliance to ensure that all disabled and deaf children and young people get the support they need? Sorry, yes.
As a hi. So it's Mags Lewis from the Green Party. Thanks for the question. The first thing that we do is we push for £5 billion to be invested in SEND provision within mainstream schools. So we'd want all of our schools to be fully accessible in buildings, and that there to be funds for pupils in the school, obviously, but also getting to the school. Like I alluded to earlier, I think the fact that SEND transport is such an issue for families. I've met families who are just, heartbroken that basically as a birthday present for their 16-year-old child, they're landed with a taxi bill for £200 a week. So it's about looking at that and trying to make sure that we make it a lot more easy to have a dignified education within the main school situation. Some children may benefit or choose to go to special schools, and that needs to be supported too, but there needs to be real choice, and there needs to be a far more simplification of the system. At the moment, I think a lot of the time, children with special educational needs and disabilities are seen as a burden rather than something that can really enhance and make a school flourish. So we just need to change the whole way it's viewed.
Thank you. Yes, Charles from the Conservatives again. As I mentioned in an earlier question, there's been a considerable rise in SEND over the past 5 years, which seems to be connected to the pandemic and lockdown. In my own council, the SEND service provided there is under huge criticism from affected families who are struggling to even get the correct EHCP documentation from the council. Only 9% of these are being achieved within the 20-week time frame, as opposed to 49% nationally. Now, SEND parents where I'm got were so concerned they had a protest outside the council headquarters back at the end of April in relation to it. It ended up, there was a motion to council which got sorted, but even then our council, we was talking about getting an LTA peer review because there was something seriously going wrong. But even then, they had to be absolutely pressed to go and get it sorted within 18 months. And as far as I'm concerned, that simply isn't good enough. Now, people talk about money, and yes, it is difficult in relation to money. But the protest that took place in Ellesmere Port outside our council headquarters was a brand new building, a £15 million building, when we've got other buildings standing by, and it's got to be about priorities. I mean, it just beggars belief that we were in that sort of scenario on a national basis, that the government has provided a new £850 million fund for England to create 60,000 new places for young people with SEND and in alternative provision in mainstream and special schools to improve the accessibility of existing buildings. So that is something good. That is obviously going to take some time to come in there. But certainly where I am in West Cheshire, it's not simply about money. It's the fact that the families need to feel that there's been a real change in empathy and culture to regain their trust and confidence, because that's what we're seeing. Again, there are no easy answers to this.
Sal Brinton, Lib Dems. I worked on this bill in 2013-14, and it was intended as a real new landscape for children and families, with education and health joining up for the first time. But over the last 8 years, this government has systematically destroyed all the mechanisms underpinning it. Cuts in local government to send funding, real terms cuts for school budgets, making it harder to fund EHCPs, and closing of special schools and respite care for disabled children. We've had that locally where I live, and it's been a disgrace, and the scandal of home to school transport. But local authorities are also, I'm afraid, part of the problem. Some are scapegoating parents and health trusts as well. But But worst of all, Michael Gove said, councils have to distinguish between deserving families. But that is not the principle of the Children and Families Act. The whole point is to ensure funding for children with either educational or health difficulties and make sure that they get it. And that must happen. Incidentally, I worked with 17 children's disability and medical charities to get statutory guidance under this Act for getting the right support for children in schools. I mean, we had children with cancer being made to do PE against their consultant's advice. We heard about a boy who died because teachers had locked away his inhaler and the teacher wasn't handy when he had a major attack. That went through, but that has been diluted twice since 2015 and is now almost utterly useless, which is a shame. So I think any reforms that may happen in the future, we will be on the case.
Vicky Foxcroft, the Labour Party. We all know every child deserves the best start in life, and education is the gateway to this. And an inclusive education system working with all stakeholders. We absolutely need to make sure that it's easier to get your EHCP plans. These need to happen in a timely fashion. And when people get them, we need to ensure that they receive the support that is set out in those plans. We also need to look into evidence-based early interventions and ensure that our services are joined up. How frustrating is it when time and time again you have to repeat the same information to get anywhere? We also need to ensure that teachers, support staff, including teaching assistants, get trained, get the training that they need. And this includes specialist SEND and alternative provision settings. Now, Labour will also recruit 6,500 new expert teachers. We will ensure that we have a modern, inclusive curriculum, and we will have free breakfast clubs, because we know quite often disabled children are living more in poverty and that it's hard to study when you're hungry throughout the day. But the final thing that I'd say is that there's quite often this cliff edge after school, and it's really important that people receive their support into the future and aren't left with that cliff edge. And so we want high quality apprenticeships and specialist colleges, but also a system that's designed to support them all the way through. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next question is from Action on Disability, and it says the Equality Act 2010 places burden on disabled people to enforce their rights in court. Despite widespread discrimination and the lack of accessibility, very few people feel able to sue service providers, education settings, or their employers for discrimination. The BSL Act does not give deaf people a right to an interpreter, does not guarantee BSL support for parents of deaf children. The rights we have under those laws are more on paper. What will your party do to change this?
Thank you. Charles, the Conservatives. Yes, I mean, the BSL Act is relatively new, and with all of these sort of things, it obviously takes time to come in. I think the basis of the question is slightly concerning in terms of it's sort of saying that people are being discriminated at because of the law. Well, ultimately the law is there, and if it is not being obeyed, then it should be pursued. So I'm not, as I say, the basis of the question slightly puzzles me, in terms of the whole point of the law is there that we can use it if we need it.
Sorry. Oh.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, just pause until they restart. Okay, so we're just going to pause while the technical issue with the captions is fixed. We can take a bathroom break or get yourself a drink. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you for that. Just thank you. Just for those that might not have been able to hear all of that and some clarification on your question as well. I think the question broadly is not necessarily about the fact that, as you say, you're concerned about the scope being about the law, but the point here really is about access to justice and the fact that courts are inaccessible. The point was just made about inaccessibility, trying to access lawyers, not being able to access legal aid from, there being inaccessible entrances to courts to not being able to, even when you face discrimination, reporting a crime to the police, just generally the whole inaccessibility of the criminal justice system.
She just mentioned quite clearly, after the LASPO Act, the provision of legal aid became very, very narrow. And if you look at the actual graphs, the number of legal aid cases, it looks like a cliff. It just goes off like that. So the laws can exist, but the access to the legal system is provided by legal aid, and legal aid was cut massively. Are we back with captions yet, Alex? Okay, thanks.
I'm here to not talk about soundbites of anger. So, now get a mic.
We'll be back. Can we 1 minute, one minute, okay? You've got 1 minute and then we're back to questions.
Okay.
So, are we back? We got captions, yes? I'm sorry, so did someone not finish their piece? Could you finish?
Where I was is that I think quite originally, passionate points have come forward there, and it's got to be about, I suppose, listening more and what we'll be able to do with that. One of the reasons I wanted to try and get into Parliament is because I'm the same. I don't live without the same voices. As I said earlier, even though I'm disabled, I don't understand all other disabilities. The point in relation to BSR, where we very much try and explain it to me. I don't know. That's kind of thing. But the more of us, I think, who are in Parliament, who have a disability, and who are open about our disability, I think the better. But I can't list the level of detail that is clearly required.
Okay, Sal, do you need to answer that question?
Thank you very much, Sal Brenton, Lib Dems. And just to pick up on Charles's point, if you are an MP in a wheelchair, as Anne Begg was, you have to sit at the bar of the House, you can't sit in the House.
No.
If you are in a wheelchair in House of Lords, there is a space you can sit in, but if you're a minister, you can't speak from the dispatch box. We have a lot to do with our Parliament. Absolutely right that we need to undo some of the things that have happened over the last 10 to 12 years. Legal aid would certainly be a start, but I think the problem is much more fundamental than that. The transition from the DRC to the EHRC was not good. It has not worked. And unfortunately, that's one of the reasons that there's a real problem, especially as I said earlier on, with the current government having downgraded the EHRC, substantially reduced its budget, so even they can only take a few cases, absolute landmark cases, to court. I know that Vicky referred to do not resuscitate orders earlier on, but that is still a mess. It is still a complete mess. It's not just a COVID issue. I mean, I have to tell you, it was pretty shocking hearing during COVID what was happening, and it was good that the government stopped it straight away when they picked it up. But people are still being asked in hospitals, I know, because again, relatives, elderly relatives are being asked, and no preparation, just as you're going in for an operation, do you want to be revived? That is not the time to do that to an 88-year-old. Finally, I had the privilege of sitting in the Supreme Court when Doug Corley won his case. That man is a one-man enforcer. And we need, but we also need more support from the state, to be frank, to make it happen. And actually, we will do what we can in Parliament, but actually, the problem at the moment is where the courts is.
Vicky Foxcroft, the Labour Party. I am proud that the last Labour government brought in this legislation, but as so passionately been articulated by so many people, it's frustrating. It's frustrating in terms of the lack of funding and resource that the EHRC have, that others have in terms of accessing justice. And I understand, I completely understand the frustrations with that. And the Tories have abandoned their responsibility to have due regard of the 9 protected characteristics, including disability. They've failed to equality impact assess policy decisions, and this has led to a lack of accessibility in public services. So we will ensure equality impact assessments of all major announcements, including fiscal events. We will ensure that BSL Act is implemented in full and look to go and enhance that in the future. We will strengthen protections, including the disability pay gap reporting and the full right to equal pay for disabled people. And we will restore enforcement of the Equality Act. And we will do this by working with disabled people to deliver this, to make sure that we get this right, because quite frankly, it's a disgrace that we've got a law there that should be protecting people, and in reality, we're not able to do that.
Thanks. Mags Lewis from the Green Party. I'd like to support everything Vicky just said, really, but also just to say I'm personally angry as a disabled person, a disabled activist. I know from how I'm treated when I try and use the Act, that businesses, etc., they know I'm not going to take them to court, I'm too exhausted, or I haven't got the funds, so they can just get away with things. I think that lack of enforcement has to change and has to be addressed, and Green MPs would be able to push for that. I think another thing I'd like to see is the established charities coming up with some test cases and helping disabled people make these, shaming people into action. Because the courts we know are so clogged up at the moment. We need to be doing that, but surely we can also use the press, we can use the power of press relations, etc., and just embarrass some of these people who are just breaking the law blatantly because they know enforcement is so dire.
Thank you. So just to clarify on where we're at now, I'm going to ask a quick yes/no follow-up. We have one more question from Rick, and then we will go to the audience, and then we will finish with a final question that comes after the audience. Sorry. So my very quick yes/no follow-up, obviously we've spoken a lot about access to justice, and we know that particularly in the disability rights movement that a huge part of that in how we access justice now and have done before has been protesting. And we have seen a lot of limiting of our rights in this area recently. So just a quick yes, no, would your party commit to repealing the recent legislation that has infringed on our protest rights? For example, the Police Crime and Sentencing Bill and the Public Order Bill as well. Thank you.
Yes.
You've been trying to get me in trouble with these yes/no questions, right? I think that that's more in terms of the Home Office team, but I will commit to go and speak to them particularly in relation to this. But I just can't give all of the kind of details and just do a yes/no without
Thank you.
getting in a bit of bother.
No. You can thank Just Stop Oil and the Extinction Rebellion for these laws.
Absolutely yes, and not just on disability issues.
Okay, thank you. This is our final question before audience question.
Okay, so we'll try and do this really quickly and answer as quickly as you can because it's quite a simple question. This is from all of the DPO forum. The best policies that changed our lives for the better were designed by disabled people. How will your party work with disabled people and their representative organisations to design policies? Will you co-produce with us? Starting with Sal.
I think there is one simple answer to this, which is nothing about us without us, because it doesn't work. And just as a case in, I will just do three bullet points. Euston Taxi Rank, they didn't bother to consult with disabled people when they put the new one in a few months ago. It doesn't work. Rail assistance apps, we were promised we could buy tickets with them. They haven't. I had to sit and book my ticket and my wheelchair assistant in parallel yesterday. It's insane. It's insane. And if they had talked to us and worked with us, they would have got it right.
Vicky Foxcroft, the Labour Party. I mean, the simple answer is yes, but I want to give a bit more details in terms of that. I'm absolutely committed to working with disabled people and deaf and disabled people's organisations. I know many of you in this room, and we have met on numerous occasions, sometimes in person, sometimes online. I started the role of Shadow Minister for Disabled People in April 2020, so at the start of COVID, so there was a lot of online. But my whole time as Shadow Minister, I've worked with disabled people and your organisations in terms of all of the work that I've done. I've not always got everything right. Sometimes I've been gently nudged to get me into the right direction. But that's exactly the point. You know, working together will get these things right. We've already been working on plans together to make sure that we deliver this if we're lucky enough to form the next government. So co-production, working with you, the experts by experience, is absolutely key to me to getting things right. And we know that it will take some time to rebuild capacity in the organisations, but it's absolutely imperative that we do this. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's also how we get those better policies and the implementation of them. And we know, as one example, that disabled people have to be thrifty with their finances every single day. Why would we not think that disabled people were thrifty with the public finances when put at the heart of the decision making? So I'm absolutely committed to this. And I know that doing this together is how we get things right and build that inclusive, fairer society that we all want and absolutely desire.
Hi, Mags Lewis from the Green Party. I'd start with, we must be at the table. And if we're not at the table, expensive mistakes happen. I can see it locally in my council where they've basically ignored the voices of disabled people and then had to unpick expensive mistakes. One thing I would add, though, is that we're not a free resource. They need to pay for it as consultants, because I'm sick to death of there being almost a sense of somehow they say, well, you didn't mention it. And you're thinking, well, you asked me to you know, whatever, comment on this particular consultation or a railway development, etc. But you're not paying me. So, and why aren't you paying me when you would expect to pay any other professional who has that kind of expertise? So I think we need to be at the table, but we also need to be valued and remunerated as well for our knowledge. I've already said that I want to see job share MPs. I think we have to show Parliament are missing out on so much talent, and also I think it sends a really strong message that we're valued if we see ourselves there. As well as looking at that, I want to reinstate the access to elected office fund, and also try and look at acknowledging where within our own parties we're not as disabled inclusive as we could be, and see what those barriers are. And one of those for me is I think we need to acknowledge where there is not a level playing field, and for example give disability groups like the one Charles is on in the Conservative Party perhaps recourse to administrative support, because I know within the Green Party we had that for a short time and it was life-changing.
Charles, the Conservative Party again, and yes, I'd agree with that sort of last comment. I think all political parties are likely to go and have disability groups within them, and it's how those are supported. As I say, there's two I'm involved with, which is Conservative Disability Group, which is more of a general sort of discussion and pushing things forward within the party, and then we have something called Ability to Win, which is effectively, as I call it, women to win, but for disabled people, and that's the type of concept of it in relation to raising the amount of people who are disabled who are candidates to the Conservative Party, and also not simply but candidates, but also in potentially winnable seats. Going back to one thing I mentioned earlier, which I think would be a really good idea for everybody who's here or watching, is to go and ask your local council if they have a disability access forum or something equivalent to that, because it's a really, really useful thing. I helped set one up because I was annoyed with a brand new council leisure centre which had been designed to be fully accessible, but the problem with it was the car parking was not close enough to it, and I had the scenario where I would have to park, get my wheelchair out, because I'm an ambulant wheelchair user, and effectively go 3/4 of the way around the building to get into a room that's on the other side of the wall from where I park the car. And it's simple things like that, which I think when you've got a good range of disabled people with a range of disabilities in a room, that you can discuss things and you can actually come up with better solutions. And I think that would be a good thing for all of us, regardless of our rosettes or indeed none.
Okay, thank you. Now, time is running away with us, so from now on, could we try and answer within 1 minute? And I'm going to go out to the floor. I know we've already got a question from Angela. So this is the wonderful Ella from GMCDP who will run the microphone to you. So do you want to go to...
Where's Angela? Oh, hiya.
Angela. So we could try and answer in 1 minute, and we can try and get as many questions in as possible.
Hi, it's Angela speaking from CHARM, which is a mental health group based in Manchester. The question is, Elite NHS England report has revealed that in just 1 year, between March 2022 and March 2023, 15,000 deaths of individuals under community mental health teams took place across England. A number of scandals, including in Greater Manchester, have revealed abuse and neglect in both inpatient and community services. Given that the crisis exists in mental health services, what steps will you take to ensure that those with severe mental health conditions will be supported and enabled to live full lives?
Start with Vicky.
Thanks for that question, Angela, and for all the work that you and your organisation does. I mean, this is something that we did touch on earlier in terms of making sure that we have, more mental health workers, But actually, in terms of the care homes and institutions, you know, I have Lewisham speaking up in my constituency. I'm South East London. Don't blame me if there's too many Northerners in the room. I've got a funny accent. I'm originally from the North. But, you know, they're absolutely terrified in terms of ending out in an institution. And we need to make sure that we go and change the culture, that we ensure that there is that community support and that people don't end out in those homes.
I support what's just been said. I think there needs to be so much more focus on mental health, but also I think the fact that people are so terrified, we need to see more enforcement of standards, but proper enforcement, that makes a difference. Okay.
I mentioned it was a leaked report. I mean, I just wonder what sort of investigation is going on there. If it's just a report, if that is what they found, there needs to be a much more serious investigation to what's gone on there, so that we can understand, to make sure it stops happening and doesn't happen elsewhere. On a wider point, I do think that it's important where there are mental health issues to be able to get the right support for people, and that should include helping people get back to work, because I think that is really important. As somebody who has suffered from depression and anxiety in the past, I can tell you that getting back to work can help in relation to it. But there are things like talking therapies that don't cost a huge amount, but they can help people get back. And that if we can do that, then I think as part of a wider range of ideas that we can help people.
Sal Brinton, Lib Dems. I agree with, I think, everything else that's been said so far. I would just go slightly further and question whether the CQC is fit for purpose, because there's 2 or 3 things going wrong. One is leadership, and 2 is the culture, which is all about how staff are trained and interact with each other. The stories that have been coming out, whether it's actual abuse of people in those institutions or neglect, neither are acceptable. And I know that the CQC has taken on board some of the reports, particularly of the big recent report that was published in Manchester, but actually they are not alone. And Ofsted has also had problems with boarding schools and other institutions. I think the regulatory framework needs to be looked at. This must be changed, and actually staff must be held to account.
Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry, just I have to mention a point of fact that the right work at the right time with the right support can be good for someone, but as a blanket idea that work is good for you is not supported by the evidence. I'm happy to provide that evidence. Okay, so I can see another hand so quickly. Okay. Sorry. Sorry, gentleman in black there. Sorry.
Hi, my name's AD from My Life, My Choice. We are a learning disability advocacy group. Well, one question, how would you make sure people with learning disability and autism who are released from long-stay hospital will see their needs are met? Yeah.
People with learning disability and autism released from long-stay hospital ensure that their needs are met. Yeah. We'll start again, just Vicky, and we'll go across the panel. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this is really important, and you know, one of the things that we do need on more local levels is to make sure that councils have gone and got the support to be able to support people with learning disabilities, with autism, in terms of working with and identifying what those needs are. So be that around education, be that around housing, be that around accessing cultural activities, be that around the support in terms of finding work in the future. So it really is important that we build up that capacity in the future, because things will be different in different areas, and actually working with those organisations. So I speak on a personal level in terms of working with Lewisham Speaking Up, who are absolutely fantastic. And I have to shout out, in terms of getting a document, an easy read, it's a dream for me because I can get through it so much simpler than having to read sometimes documents that are several hundred pages long.
Mags from Green Party. Yeah, it's key that the needs of these people are met, and councils and the social care need an overhaul. We all know that. I think also there should be work with charities and with advocacy groups and the individuals as well. And also, a lot of the kind of answers are out there already. We just need to replicate good examples that we've all seen in the community, and not kind of think that we need to start from scratch. You know, we can actually improve things by trying to learn and also work collaboratively.
Yes, Charles, the Conservatives. Yeah, I agree with more or less everything that's been said already. I think that we need to be able to go and have a range of options to be able to help people. That can include work. That isn't always the best option for everybody, but if it can be, then that's good. We just need to be able to go and see what we can do. I know a pair of brothers quite well. They both got learning difficulties. One is more able to work than the other, and I think looking at charities and voluntaries and to work out best practice, I think, is what's been there to go and help people to find what works for them in terms of good solutions, and good help is a good thing to do.
Sal Brinton, Lib Dems. Yes, again, I agree with everything else that's been said. I think we need to think very consciously about step-down support, particularly for people who've been in institutions for a very long time. It's not dissimilar to the case of Andrew Malkinson, who was released from prison after 17 years for a crime he didn't commit. And there's been he's talked about how he's had to learn to adjust, and he hasn't had that support. So I think it's absolutely vital that we get all the support structures in place, and there isn't going to be, oh, well, you'll be in this stage for X weeks and then you can go off and do things. It has to be tailored to every individual person's needs.
Okay, thank you. We've got over 20 questions online, so I'm going to take one of those now. So, Jodie Whiting, a 42-year-old woman with multiple physical and mental health impairments and conditions, took her own life after her benefits were stopped. Her family received a letter confirming that she was fit for work while she lay in the mortuary waiting to be buried. What will your party commit to a transformation towards a humane, rights-based welfare system? We'll start again with Vicky and move across.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that Vicky Foxcroft, Labour Party. That's, one of the things in terms of the previous questions that we were talking about, the work capability assessment process. We know it isn't working. We know it's inhumane. We know that many people don't get their decision right the first time. We know that people are going for reassessments time and time again when they don't necessarily need to be, because their condition isn't going to improve. We know it needs fixing, and that's the reason why I'm absolutely committed to working with disabled people's organisations to make sure that we get this right, because the lives that have been lost because of the way the assessment process happens is absolutely heartbreaking. And anybody that's looked at the stuff online, seen any of the videos, can't be anything other than absolutely, totally moved because of it.
Yes, I agree. I think the system is bureaucratic. It's expensive. It's not fit for purpose. I think we've all given so much feedback on what needs to happen and how the system needs to be changed and how it could be tweaked and made better. So all that needs to happen now is action, and it needs to be changed.
Yes, and I think that the way forward is the disability action plan that is set out there, and I hope that the next government, whichever rosette it wears will pick that up and take it forward, because I think it is a good way forward.
Just before I answer, I want to do a big shout out to John Pring at the Disability News Service, who is so hated in the DWP, so hated because he persisted when many others wouldn't. Thank you, John. There has to be a major culture change inside the DWP. And the other department I say that about repeatedly is the Home Office, but for different areas. It almost doesn't matter which government is in power. There is something about the culture that has absolutely got to change. And I do hope that the next government takes that on.
Okay, so we have time for one, but a yes/no question. Does someone have a yes/no question? Okay, Svetlana, you got a yes/no question.
Okay, I know what I So, does your party commit to social model of disability? It's one question. And two, if yes, then can you believe, do you think you can achieve equality for disabled people without investing in removing barriers?
Super quickly. Can we go? We'll start with Sal and go in the reverse direction.
Absolutely yes, to the first question. And it is not without costs, because barriers take a while to come down.
No, I don't agree with the social model of disability. I think it is as discredited as critical race theory. It creates a gap that can never be the gap can never be reduced and eliminated, because we have lots of different disabilities, and what works for one doesn't work for another. So I think it is wokeness gone mad.
So, Mags Lewis Green Party, yes, definitely. And no, I don't think it can be done without some cost, because barriers are there and we can't ignore them.
Vicky Foxcroft, the Labour Party. Sorry, I'm a bit in shock. It's definitely not woke to support the social model of disability, and the Labour Party is absolutely committed to that. In terms of investment on equality, you know, there will need to be more investment. You know, Labour are hoping to grow the economy. You'll have heard people say that before, and then make sure that we invest more. And if I can just say one quick thing on John Pring, I happen to think he's absolutely fantastic. You might be surprised to hear me say this, because quite often he does give me a slightly hard time when he doesn't hear what he wants to hear. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. This Hustings sponsored by John Pring. Disability News Service. One really super quick question from Tom, and then we have to wrap up.
Hello, thank you so much. So my name is Tom Litchie. I am the Head of Policy and Research at the British Deaf Association, the BDA. So just a quick yes or no question for all of you. At the British Deaf Association, we really believe that deaf and disabled people need to lead on their own services. Will you commit for deaf and disabled people to deliver their own services in the future? Will you work with us to upskill us to be able to deliver our own services?
Start with Sal and move across.
Absolutely, in principle, but there is one caveat, which is we must not have...
Sorry, my question, I hadn't finished my question.
Sorry.
So will your parties agree to the principle of, say, the first 5 years of the new government to work with deaf and disabled people to upskill us in order to take responsibility to lead and deliver the services that we require ourselves? Nothing about us that is not led by us. Thank you.
So Sal Brinton, Lib Dems, yes, in principle. My concern is that the current government has made it almost impossible for many charities to be able to do their campaigning work because of the contracts to deliver. And that we must guard against. On the other hand, I'm supportive in principle. What I don't want is a government hobbling our charities.
Very quickly, everybody, please.
Yes, in principle, disabled people should always be able to go and have a say in issues that affect them, specifically when it's their disability. So yes.
Max?
Yes, and I'd want to make sure that when people are actually involved and at the table, that it actually translates to action and isn't just a listening exercise.
And Vicky?
Yeah, in principle, I know we've met and discussed this in the past, Tom, but it will take time. And, we wouldn't necessarily be able to say that we could do it overnight, but the principle of working together to get there, absolutely 100%.
Final question from the DPO forum. There are 4 consultations open on PIP, fit notes, disabled students allowance, and relationship, sex and health education. Will you dump the consultation and the policies proposed in them? Starting with Sal.
I can't say we would dump them, but I know there are large chunks of them we really don't like.
No, they're consultations, so if you don't like them, go in there and put your feedback in there. So no, I wouldn't dump the consultations.
I personally find the number of consultations overwhelming, and I'd want to see it really, really honed down because I distrust them a lot of the time. Is that really bad? So I'd want to have them reviewed radically.
I didn't pick up all of the consultation.
PIP, fit notes, disabled students allowance, and relationship, sex and health education.
Yeah, but I thought it was in that area. There's a lot of dangerous stuff in terms of each of these kind of consultations, or actually the proposals before the consultations. So kind of to say that we wouldn't look at what came back would not be true, because that would be quite disrespectful in terms of everybody that's made the things. But in terms of certain bits of what is suggested in it, it doesn't make sense. So I know that's kind of a fudge answer, but...
Okay, thank you. We have run well out of time. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sal Brinton. Thank you, Charles Fowfield. Thank you... Sorry. Thank you, Mags. From the Green Party, I'm sorry, and Vicky Foxcroft from Labour. Thank you for all being here and online, hello online, wherever you are, for making history. This was the first disabled-led and disabled panel hustings in British history, and I just want to finish with this. Over the last decade and a half, we've had 2 United Nations reports that have found grave and systemic human rights abuses of disabled people. We still face institutionalization, poverty and avoidable deaths. We have a chance to turn this decline around, to regain and extend our rights and remove the disabling barriers in our society. So the next time the UN report comes around, the UK will no longer be notorious for its abuse of disabled people. We are ready for this challenge. Will the next government work with us to make an inclusive and non-disabling society a reality? Whoever that government may be, we're ready. We hope you are. We're not taking no for an answer. Thank you, everybody. That was the 2024 general election hustings, sponsored by the Disability News Service and John Pring, apparently.